work for a small non-profit company, NetDEF. I actually am one of the person who started the FRRouting project. For the ones who are not familiar with it, that's a routing stack, so all the routing protocols, BGP, OSPF, and so on. It's an open source project, which is a quite big community. It's used by many commercial applications and many commercial vendors. And I have a very strong interest in open source. I used to work for many years at a large vendor, Cisco to be specific, and I sometimes got a bit sad how the end user is not really getting their feedback integrated anymore, and how these people or the companies just do the profit maximization. And I think especially in some countries where you don't have that strong or good relationship to a vendor, it sometimes makes much more sense to keep the know-how inside the country, get people who work and live in your own country to learn about it and start managing, develop the whole code on their own. So I had a lot of discussions sometimes in other countries to see, can we get more open source users out, that people really go to use the open source, that we have a community in that country too who actually develops, and have the huge advantage for a company. If they need a new feature, they may not have to go beg some vendor to develop it, who may completely ignore them because they may not have the good relationship because they're too small. But instead they can potentially talk to the local people they got from their own university who have all the know-how, who learned about it, and they can develop it for themselves and start this way, keeping all the money inside the country, helping your own economy and stuff too, and give these people a chance that when they study somewhere in computer science, that they can actually use that thing. And I think there's a huge advantage of a lot of countries, especially in some places in the Asia Pacific area is very interesting. I also think a lot of in Africa, places where the cost of buying a normal regular router is just extremely high, and many times this could be very easy be done with open source. The challenge currently is that many of these companies are a bit afraid on using it because they worry about it. If I'm using this open source and something goes wrong, what should I do? I mean, how do I resolve it? But at the same time, it's for me funny that a lot of them don't realize that they may be already using it. Especially our FRRouting is used by a lot of white box vendors. It's used by the Sonic project, it's used by the Dent project. There is previous Cumulus, now Nvidia whiteboard switches, which are all based on it. There are multiple firewall vendors who use it as a routing, and they won't even know potentially about using it. So it's very widely used. There's obviously other open source software as well, and I think today the state of it is quite well. Even building high-speed routers with technology like VPP, there is also the Sonic and Dent. It's not a problem to have routers with multiple 100-gig interfaces anymore. That's the hard part, and especially it's much easier in Europe, where it's basically one kind of culture mostly. But in Asia Pacific or also in Africa, there is a lot of different cultures who may not listen to each other, they may not be trusting each other or learning from each other.
Yes.
So it's more like a country by country trying to convince them, trying to use it. I think what it normally needs is one company who is trying it, and in that country who is then potentially talking about our huge cost savings. And if there are the first one, there is in lots of countries is the people who make the decision. If something goes wrong,
yes,
they fear that they may lose their job. And at the same time, if they buy from a classical large vendor and something goes wrong, it's normally they can blame it on that vendor. It's not their fault. But the same thing may go wrong. So what to expect, I think it gets much more commodized or something there. It's the large vendors, they maybe still building for the very high-end stuff there. They may also innovate. What I see is more, it's not that open source will destroy all these companies. I see more that it will push them to innovate again. So they will, I hope they get real competition, so they really have to start innovate and develop new things. So the whole economy, the whole world itself will basically evolve and get like much more interesting things. And it's just by that people are more open and trying it out. And like the vendor cannot just say like, you are too small, I ignore you. It's more likely that the vendor will know if I ignore him, he may move to some open source, he will do it himself and I will lose him. And he has to then figure out, is it worthwhile? The shareholders may need to understand that support on some large classic vendors is not that perfect and they have bugs. And I think if they sometimes talk to the technical people, they will learn enough about problems they have in software and other things or in the hardware. It's normally most of the vendors that are quite good in hardware support. So if a box breaks, we give you a next one very fast. But if you find a software problem or something, it's quite common that people are expecting that, yes, I wait a month, I wait a year or something for a fix because I'm not big enough, or it's the vendor doesn't understand it well enough, or it's not that important for them.
Okay.
And they just don't get it fixed. And I think a shareholder from a company needs to understand the cost of that too, and they need to consider that the risk, if they can have their own people who understand the code, which may be quite cheap and easy to get from their own local university and train it, that may be much better, and they have way faster fix time because they have their own staff who can understand and fix the code themselves. I think the key thing is I see a lot of people, sometimes they study in a country where there is not that easy of a market to work in this area. And I see a lot of people, sometimes these days there is this classical hypes in universities. Currently it's artificial intelligence is the big hype. I see a lot of people moving there, but I'm sometimes question how much jobs they find, especially if they're in a country which doesn't have a big research in that area. At the same time, when there is not that many people interested in networking anymore, and I think it's sometimes people think the networking is just a plumbing, it's there, and they're missing out all the interesting challenges in there. And I think there's a lot of things, and because working with network technology, the community is very connected, it's worldwide.
Yes.
Once you start showing up to some of these conferences and you start to meet other people, it doesn't matter anymore where you live. You can find a job from whichever place you are, as long as you have internet. You can basically work from there and you can basically get a really nice future. And I think that's the interesting thing. So you don't have to, a country doesn't have to lose the talent, and the people have a chance to stay where their families are, where they feel comfortable, and work from there.
Okay.